Are you overly focused on what your kids are eating instead of thinking about how they're eating? Hi, I'm Kiyah Duffey, nutrition expert, entrepreneur, speaker, and mom of 3. I help busy, health-conscious parents transform their family's relationship with food. And today I want to talk about something that's very personal to me. So I have a PhD in nutritional epidemiology. And when my first baby was born, I had this realization that the time when she was transitioning from breast or bottle feeding into solid foods, that this was a time when I could positively influence her relationship with food. It was a time when I could help her create the kinds of habits that I had been studying in adults, and that many of these habits adults were saying, gosh, I wish I didn't behave this way. I wish I didn't have this habit. And I started reading the literature, and I realized, as I've just said, that this is a critical time when kids are beginning to transition into solid foods, when we have the opportunity to influence their behaviors and their habits around food and mealtime, and that we can give them the kinds of habits we might want as adults. And for a while I did that, and it worked really well. My oldest was an adventurous eater, and I felt like I have got this. I know what I'm doing. But then baby number 2 came along, and he didn't feel the same way about food that his older sister did. He didn't feel the same way about tacos or curry or even bananas and goldfish. And I felt utterly confused. Like, what am I doing wrong that this isn't working anymore? And, with my oldest, I was reading everything I could in the nutrition literature to try to understand what has been demonstrated to help me achieve this goal that I have, to help her have a positive relationship with food. And because he's only a couple of years younger, the science wasn't changing fast enough. I started looking for advice, not just evidence, to help me understand what I could possibly do for him because it wasn't working the same as it was for her. And the problem with this is that the advice I was getting was often contradictory. Oh, you got to start with fruits. Kids love sweet flavors. They have a preference for sweet tastes. So start with fruit. No. Don't start with fruit, or that is all they will want are sweet foods. You need to start with vegetables. Well, fruit, vegetables, it doesn't matter. Don't forget about iron or meats or iron fortified foods, because then your kids will be iron deficient. Well, it doesn't matter what you start with. Just make sure you're giving them lots of flavors so that they can eventually, they'll just move into eating what you eat, because you make foods with lots of flavors in them. No. Don't do that. You'll miss food allergies. It has to be one food, one flavor at a time. And on and on and on and on and on. And the problem with this advice, of course, is that it was conflicting and often contradictory. And no matter what I did, I couldn't follow all of it all the time. If I followed one, I wasn't following the other. And so it left me feeling more confused and overwhelmed. And I thought that I was alone with this. I was sharing this with a group of moms, and one of them said to me, I don't know, that is not my experience at all. I was just trying to survive and get food on the table. So what you dealt with, that doesn't resonate with me. So again, I thought that I kind of was alone with that, but I found an article recently. It's a study, it's kind of old now, it's from 2019. But it's a qualitative study of first-time parents, mothers and fathers, and they are discussing the challenges that they felt during the transition time from milk, breast and bottle feeding, into solid foods. And there were some elements of this study that, it felt like me talking. So in the study, one of the things they say is that this transition phase, that for these pairs, the mother was implicitly considered as the main parent responsible for the infant's food intake and infant meals, and that this responsibility carried with it an obligation to do the right thing in the right manner. And if that didn't resonate with what I was feeling. I thought that if I could read enough and do enough, I could just figure out the right way to feed my kids, and then there would be no problems. And one of the other things this article identifies is that during this transition phase, access to reliable information on what to feed the infant was very important for parents. First-time parents, again, like, what do I do? In fact, more than 30,000 parents every month search, what do I feed my baby? So this is an issue that is on a lot of people's minds. However, the article goes on to say, having access to a large body of information without being able to judge its validity created a paradox for these parents. And that achieving and missing information, so finding information and not knowing what was missing from that, meant that parents could feel insecure as to whether or not they lived up to the information being given about what the right food is at the right time. I felt like this article heard me. And the good news is that there was a 2022 randomized trial that can help us shed some light on this question about what is right and what we should be doing and how we can feed our kids. So this is a randomized trial of 246 first-time mothers and their infants, and they were randomized into 4 arms. The first was an intervention that promoted repeated exposure to a variety of fruits and vegetables. They call this the what arm. What you should do, repeatedly expose your kids to a variety of fruit and vegetables. Second was an intervention arm that promoted responding sensitively to a child's signals during mealtime. So they gave them video feedback that promoted positive feeding practices. And they call this the how arm, how you feed your baby. This is what we're going to focus on in this arm. The third arm of this intervention gave parents information on both what and how, and that was compared to the control group, a fourth arm that was just be attentive to your baby. So what did this study find? This study found that more sensitive feeding behavior and less pressure to eat was found in the how group, the video feedback, and the combined how and what group, compared to either of the other 2 groups alone. What does this mean? This means that simply focusing on what you feed your kids is less powerful, less important, less meaningful in the long run than focusing on how you're feeding your kids or how and what you're feeding your kids. This is a lot to take in, but I do have some ideas, 4 things you can do to focus on how you're feeding your kids. First, think about what you and your partner, and thus your family unit, value, and how those values can be reflected in your mealtime decisions and in the ways in which you talk about, present, and engage with food. Think about your values and have a conversation with your partner on what their values are. And I have some other videos on these if you're interested in how to have these kinds of conversations and why they're so important. Number 2, reflect on what kind of eater you want your kids to be in the future. Think years down the road. What kind of relationship do you want your kids to have with food? Not what do you want them to eat, but what kind of relationship do you want them to have with this? How do you want them to think about food and themselves and their interaction with it? And once you have a sense of that, think about what kind of actions are going to be important for you now and in the years leading up to that can help your kids develop that kind of relationship or develop to that goal that you have. Number 3, be really clear with yourself, with your partner, and with anyone else in your life that is part of food and mealtime decisions about what your role is when it comes to food and what your kid's role or responsibility is. In our family, we really subscribe to Ellen Satter's division of responsibility. It is my and my husband's responsibility to decide what foods come into our house, what is available, what is accessible, and to decide when food is served. And it is up to my kids to decide how much they want to eat. You know, I don't know their bodies as well as they do, and one of my goals for my kids is for them to be mindful eaters, to really be able to listen to their own bodies and signals of hunger and fullness. And so I don't force them to eat if they're not hungry. I don't force them to clear their plates. We have a lot of conversations about appropriate portion sizes and serving themselves appropriately and taking a little bit at first to wait and see if they're hungry and have seconds. But it is not my responsibility to tell them how much to eat. All right, and number 4, try to keep the big picture in mind. Although it can feel stressful, you've just made a meal, made a snack, and your kids don't want to eat it, or they refuse a particular meal. Maybe that happens a few meals in a row, and maybe that starts to worry you, that they're not getting enough of the right things. Try to keep a couple of things in mind. So that kind of variability in child's appetite is normal from day to day and even within a day. Our kids' appetites vary. They are not consistent. And so any measure of what your kid, how much they ate yesterday is not necessarily an indication of how much they will eat today. So knowing that that variability is normal can maybe help give you some peace. And number 2, if your goal is to help teach your kids lifelong healthy eating habits, that happens over decades. It really does. It happens over such a long time span. And so what happens at any given meal is less important than the fact that you are giving them consistent messaging and that your behaviors around food and mealtime are consistent over years. So try to keep that big picture in mind. Now, I want to be clear about one thing here. What you feed your kids is important. It does matter. What you bring into the home, what kind of foods they're exposed to, how often they're exposed to those foods, that is important. And it is important in helping you help them achieve their goals. But focusing only on what you're feeding them, in the absence of also considering how you're talking about food, how you're modeling food behaviors, how you're engaging in mealtime, is going to be far less useful in helping them create lasting healthy habits. Okay, your turn. I want to hear from you. What tips do you have in your house for helping to keep that big picture in mind and helping your kids develop a lifelong positive relationship with food? Drop me a comment. And if you want more tips on how to help transform your family's relationship with food, you can find that and so much more on my website, KiyahDuffey.com.